So I am sitting here with a very wonderful Yolo Akili Robinson, who is the founder and executive director of BEAM, which is the Black Emotional Mental Health Collective. Did I get that right?
You did.
Tell us a little bit about Yolo. Where are you from, and what were some of your earliest experiences as a Black queer man?
I'm a military brat, but I was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Lived all across the really world, Germany, all across the United States. Really kind of went to high school and middle school in Georgia, so I definitely really affirmed my Southern roots. So that's kind of my background there. Um, as a Black queer person, like, I definitely recognize that, I've lived most of my life as identifying as a Black gay man, and now I'm very clearly non-binary and identify as non-binary. But those lines in terms of expression, community are not fixed, right? They're very blurry and like connected, and the experiences are very similar in many ways, particularly in the ways in which I'm perceived in the world. So yeah, so that's me, who I am, and yeah.
What was it that drew you to mental health work? And then secondly, what is the impact on especially the mental health of Black, gay, and queer people?
I've been drawn to wellness work for quite some time. I think that, like, even when I was in high school, I was a peer mediator counselor, right? Like, I was really interested in like conflict resolution, really interested in diplomacy and how to like reconcile challenges. I think that comes out of, growing up in an environment and in communities where there were a lot of challenges and a lot of distress, and not a lot of tools or strategies on how to actually navigate that distress in ways that centered dignity and didn't harm people, right? So when I got to college, when I got to Atlanta, got involved in like, local social justice organizing, really around feminism and reproductive justice, it opened up my whole world to, the ways in which wellness, from yoga to therapy to other strategies, would change the ways I relate to my body, but also change the way I relate to myself, and which also would lead me to make different choices in relationship to my life, right? And so that journey that was a part of the journey, but it's really, the pull to do the work was really in my belief that there could be something different in terms of how I feel in my body, but also we all feel in our bodies, how we relate to each other. There's a more loving possibility than what I saw modeled for me in a lot of my early childhood life. There's legitimate fear, anxiety, and concern around the mental health industrial complex, around that kind of care. Because for our folks in this country, many of us often experience mental health through the lens or through the framing of the prison industrial complex. Like a lot of folks, when I was traveling the South pre-COVID, doing a lot of work in communities, and I would ask people, what's the first thing that comes up to your mind when you hear mental health? They would say things like the social worker that took my cousin away. Or, I had a friend who had, broke down emotionally and got arrested and has been in jail ever since, right? So the connotations we have often with mental health are the prison industrial complex. And for many of us, those two are not separated. So the fear of that is real, right? Someone named that. The fear of the fear of the mental health industrial complex is real. I think we tend to think that, like, particularly for people of a certain class perspective, they think that like therapy is like Sunday brunch. But for a lot of folks who are working class, who are working poor, we've experienced therapy as this way to punish us, to penalize us, to often harm us in ways, or being connected to other ways that have been harmed, whether it's being sentenced to go to a certain thing or all those different dimensions, which doesn't feel healing for us, right? So that fear is legitimate. The second piece is the impact of what happens when you hold emotionally, the emotional weight of things you've experienced, and you don't express it, you don't get it out of your body, you don't have an opportunity for someone to correct or offer an alternative to a narrative and story you have in your head, because you have never shared that narrative and story. You just assumed it was always the absolute truth, right? Yeah. The consequences of that are, considerable, right? For Black queer men, when I think about some of those consequences and the way they show up, if I am not processing experiences I've had where my body has been harmed, where I have been shamed, where I've been hurt, that hurt doesn't go away. It stays in my body. It distorts the lens through which I am able to interpret and see other people. I can't see you, Sampson, for who you are. I see you as someone who might potentially hurt me because you might look like my ex-boyfriend, or because you might say something that reminds me and activates a feeling connected to my ex-boyfriend. These are things that will happen to all of us. But if we weren't doing the work consistently to interrogate, to peel back, then what happens is it just kind of like collects and distorts our relationships to ourselves, each other, our capacity to love, to build connection. And so healing and mental health are critical, when they're done in a healing justice framework, which means in a consent-based framework and a loving framework. They're critical to help us peel back and let go of some of that stuff, to cry it out, to dance it out, to talk it out, journal, whatever that method is. But we have to do it in community. And I think that in our communities, unfortunately, while there are a growing number of people who are talking about mental health and wellness, there's a lot of us that are scared. Like, I don't want nobody to see me, because if you see me, I still got shamed about the things I've done. I still got fear about the things I've done. And so I'd rather shut up and keep it down here than let it out. But the consequences of keeping it repressed are the increased anxiety, the depressive symptoms, the other kind of conditions that we see in communities that get magnified because I'm not dealing with that stuff. And so let's always tell everybody, anybody, Black queer men, Black queer people, imagine there's a possibility of how you can feel differently in your body and in your spirit if you engage in the work and try and engage the fear of being seen. If you allow yourself to be seen with someone you can build trust with, whether it's whatever kind of wellness practitioner, a therapist, if it's a yoga, if it's a life coach, finding someone who has the training and skill to hold you, there's a lot of benefits on the other end.
The person who I feel sees me is my weed man. And so
listen, look, weed is a very critical part of our self-care, right? It's anxiety management. That's real. That's real. And that's the piece of it I always tell people, we as Black people, we've always had coping and healing strategies, right? Absolutely. We've had our kitchen table healing conversations. We've had the prayers in the circle of the church, right? We've had different ways of even just shouting and stomping down, ways of trying to process and transmute all the stuff that we're feeling, right? And so I would never minimize weed or apple cider vinegar or even all these strategies. The thing we have to be really mindful of is to say, I think about a tool belt, I think about Batman, right? Batman has all his tool belts. Now, he knows that certain tools are really great for certain things, and certain tools don't make it for what he's trying to go. For the Batarang, it might be dope if you're just trying to hit a crook and get them knocked out. But that Batarang against Superman ain't gonna work, right? You're gonna need something different. When it comes to our tool belt, our emotional wellness tool belt, we can have weed, we can have dancing, we can have music and art, and those can be great things. But sometimes if we're trying to beat a Superman down, right, we might need to enlist the support of someone to help us do a deeper dive, which might mean therapy, which might mean medication, which might mean life coaching, it might mean yoga, whatever that is, because the tool has to be proportional to the actual challenge. And when we're talking about living with depression and anxiety and mania, those things can be considerable challenges. And we need a stronger guide, a stronger tool to help us move through them than just some of the other standard tools, or than some tools can provide, excuse me.
So you mentioned some great health practices such as journaling, meditation, dancing, art, weed, that sort of thing. What are some other ways that Black folks, and especially Black queer folks, can overcome certain barriers when it comes to wellness and mental health?
So a big part of how we can continue to support each other, it starts with us doing our own work, right? And doing our own work in community. And I think it's an important piece, reading self-help books, meditation, yoga, those are great. They're really good at helping us regulate. I think so there's a difference between a practice that helps me regulate my central nervous system, my body, like yoga, meditation, they're good for that. They'll help you feel more grounded and rooted. And then we're talking about behavioral change, which was when we get into therapy, right? That's when I need somebody to help me unlearn a pattern of behavior. That's when I need somebody to help me process a deep trauma that's influencing a pattern of behavior. That's when we get to talk about therapy, because therapy will help us with the behavioral piece and regulation, but often some of the practices like weed and meditation, they may not help us learn new behaviors. They may just help us regulate. I want to make sure to name that distinction there. Things that we can do in our communities to help ourselves heal are the things we've been doing forever, and it's amplifying them and getting more skills. A big part of our work at Beam is we are a training institution. We train people who are barbers, coaches, therapists, big mamas, friends, cousins, to have more skills to understand wellness and mental health, and how wherever they are, whatever hood you in, you have better skills and understanding about how to show up for yourself and for other people. The last piece I'll say is that, like, wherever you are in the community, you have a role in cultivating the wellness of the community. And it starts with your work, it starts with self-reflection, it starts with honesty, it starts with getting help, and whatever that help looks like, right? Like, you can look in a lot of different ways, but getting outside of your own head can be a really powerful, transformative practice. I want us to know that how things are doesn't mean they have to be that way. How we feel consistently, how we feel in our bodies, how we feel in our relationships, how we may feel inadequate or struggle with lovelessness, that doesn't have to be the way things are. We can reimagine our world, we can reimagine ourselves. And to do that, the healing and mental health work is a part of that, right? It is the processing, it is the vulnerability. It can be scary, but moving with the fear is how we transform ourselves. And so when I hear so many things in our communities about, being hurt, being ghosted, being, the trauma, those pieces, those things are the real things we experience. And we all have an opportunity to show up differently and to figure out how to show up differently by doing the work so that we can create a different dynamic for our communities, right? It's possible. So I just want to invite us to always know that we can imagine differently. It doesn't have to be the way it is now. And doing the work can help you do that.